The rain had started an hour before sunset, soft at first, then building into the kind of storm that made the old cottage walls groan. Nadia stood at the kitchen window, watching water carve rivulets down the glass, and felt her chest tighten with something that wasn't quite fear. She had chosen this place because it sat at the edge of town, far enough from prying eyes but close enough to run if she needed to. 2 years of running had taught her to always know where the exits were. The kettle whistled on the stove behind her. She turned and poured hot water over chamomile leaves, breathing in the steam, letting it calm the restless ache that had lived under her ribs since the day she walked away from everything she had ever known. The wolf inside her had gone silent then. No howl, no push for freedom, just a hollow quiet that felt like grief. She carried her cup to the small table by the fire and wrapped both hands around the warmth. The cottage was hers for another month. After that, she would move again. She always did. It was easier that way. Easier than explanations. Easier than letting anyone get close enough to ask why she never talked about family or home. Before you go further into this night, if stories like this speak to something in you, please subscribe. You won't miss the next one. The knock at the door came so suddenly she flinched, hot tea sloshing over her fingers. She set the cup down and wiped her hand on her jeans, heart kicking hard against her ribs. No one knocked at this hour. No one knew where she lived. She crossed the room slowly, every instinct screaming at her to stay silent, to pretend she wasn't home. But the knock came again, firmer this time, deliberate. Whoever stood on the other side wasn't leaving. Nadia unlocked the door and opened it a crack, and the words she had been prepared to say died in her throat. A man stood on her doorstep, drenched to the bone, dark hair plastered to his forehead, water running in streams from the shoulders of his coat. He was tall, broad across the chest, and even soaked through, he carried himself like someone who had never needed to ask permission for anything. His eyes found hers and held, storm gray and unblinking, and she felt the air leave her lungs in a rush. "Nadia," he said, and his voice was low, steady, threaded with something that sounded like relief. She didn't ask how he knew her name. She could feel it now, the pull she had spent 2 years trying to forget, rising up through her bones like a tide. Her wolf stirred, sluggish and confused, and for the first time in so long she felt the shape of it inside her chest. "No," she whispered, and slammed the door. Her hands shook as she twisted the lock. She pressed her back against the wood and closed her eyes, willing her heart to slow, willing the wolf to go back to sleep. This couldn't be happening. She had been so careful. She had covered her tracks, changed her name, lived like a human in every way that mattered. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said through the door, his voice calm, patient. "I just need to talk. Go away. I can't." She heard him shift his weight, heard the rain hammering the porch roof above him. A crack of thunder rolled across the sky and the lights inside flickered once, twice, then steadied. "My name is Rowan," he said. "I've been looking for you for a long time." Nadia opened her eyes and stared at the peeling paint on the door. Rowan. The name stirred something in the back of her mind. A whisper of reputation, of power. She had heard it once, maybe twice, in the careful conversations wolves had when they thought no one was listening. Rowan. Alpha King. The one who held the northern territories without cruelty. The one other alphas either respected or feared. "I don't know you," she said. "You do," he answered quietly. "You just don't remember yet." Her wolf pushed harder now, restless, curious, and she hated it. She had worked so hard to bury that part of herself, to live without the instincts that had only ever brought her pain. And now this stranger stood on her doorstep in the rain, and her wolf woke up like it had been waiting for him all along. "I'm not going back," she said, louder this time. "Whatever you think I am, whatever you came here for, I'm not going back." There was a pause, long enough that she thought maybe he had given up. Then his voice came again, softer, edged with something that sounded almost like regret. "I'm not here to take you back. I'm here because you're mine." The bond snapped into place so hard she gasped, one hand flying to her chest, as if she could catch it, hold it, push it away. It burned under her skin, bright and undeniable, a golden thread pulling tight between her heart and his. She felt his presence like a second pulse, steady and sure, and her knees nearly buckled. "No," she said again, but the word had no strength left in it. "I know you're afraid," Rowan said. "I know you have every reason to be. But I'm asking you to open the door. Just let me see you, please." Nadia pressed her forehead against the wood and tried to breathe. The bond hummed between them, warm and insistent, and she hated how right it felt. She had spent 2 years building a life without this. Without wolves, without packs, without the threat of someone else deciding her fate. But he wasn't demanding. He was asking. She straightened slowly and unlocked the door. When she pulled it open this time, she didn't hide behind it. She stood in the doorway and met his eyes and let him see exactly how much she didn't want this. Rowan looked at her like she was something holy. His gaze moved over her face, taking in the dark eyes that had learned not to trust, the mouth set in a hard line, the damp brown hair that fell past her shoulders in loose waves. She was smaller than him, fine-boned and quiet, dressed in old jeans and a sweater that had seen too many washes. There was a scar along her collarbone, barely visible above the neckline, and his jaw tightened when he saw it. "You're real," he said, and his voice cracked just enough that she almost believed he had been afraid she wasn't. "I don't want a mate," Nadia said. "I know. I don't want a bond. I know." She swallowed hard, searching his face for the trap, the angle, the thing that would prove this was just another cage with a different lock. But all she saw was patience and something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Then why are you here?" she asked. Rowan glanced past her into the warm glow of the cottage, then back to her face. Rain dripped from his coat onto the worn boards of the porch. Thunder growled somewhere in the distance. "Because I've been looking for you since the night you disappeared," he said. "Because I tracked your scent across 3 territories and thought I'd lost you a dozen times. Because the bond told me you were out here, alone, and I couldn't. I couldn't leave you that way." Nadia shook her head slowly, arms wrapping around herself. "You don't even know me." "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." She wanted to slam the door again. She wanted to tell him to go back to whatever kingdom he ruled and forget he ever found her. But the bond pulled tighter, and her wolf leaned into it like a flame after years in the cold, and she was so tired of running. "The storm's getting worse," Rowan said quietly. "I'm not asking you to accept me. I'm just asking if I can wait it out somewhere dry. I'll leave in the morning if that's what you want." It was the crack in his voice that did it, the quiet honesty, the way he stood there soaked through and didn't demand, didn't command, just asked. Nadia stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can come in," she said. "But don't mistake this for anything more than shelter." Rowan stepped across the threshold, careful not to brush too close, and the bond flared bright between them as the door swung shut behind him. Rowan stood just inside the door, dripping onto the worn rug, and made no move to go further. Nadia closed the door behind him and stepped back, putting the width of the room between them. The cottage felt smaller now, the firelight throwing shadows that hadn't been there before. "There are towels in the bathroom," she said, nodding toward the narrow hallway. "First door on the right." He nodded once and moved carefully, like someone afraid of startling a wild thing. She heard the bathroom door click shut and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The bond hummed under her skin, quieter now but still there, a golden thread she couldn't cut no matter how much she wanted to. She poured a second cup of tea and set it on the table, then returned to her chair by the fire. Her hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and tried to think past the panic rising in her chest. He had found her. After 2 years of silence, of hiding, of living so carefully that even her own wolf had gone to sleep, he had found her. And the worst part was that some traitorous corner of her heart was glad. The bathroom door opened and Rowan emerged, his coat gone, his shirt still damp but no longer dripping. He had run a towel through his hair and it stood in dark, unruly waves. Without the rain obscuring him, she could see him more clearly. The strong line of his jaw, the faint scar that traced from his temple to his cheekbone, the way his shoulders filled the narrow hallway. He moved like someone used to command, but there was a carefulness in the way he approached the fire, a deliberateness that told her he was trying not to crowd her. "Thank you," he said, nodding toward the tea. She didn't answer. He sat in the chair across from her, leaving the table between them, and wrapped his hands around the cup the same way she had. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. The rain beat against the windows. The bond pulled gently, insistently, like a current beneath still water. "How did you find me?" Nadia asked finally. Rowan looked up from his tea, his gray eyes steady on hers. "Your scent," he said. "It's distinct. Even after all this time, even buried under human soap and distance, I'd know it anywhere." She felt her stomach twist. "I covered my tracks." "You did," he agreed. "Better than most. It took me months just to figure out which direction you'd gone. You didn't leave a trail. You didn't tell anyone. You just vanished." That was the point. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know. Then why didn't you stop looking?" The question hung between them, sharper than she had meant it to be. Rowan set his cup down and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, and she saw something flicker across his face. Exhaustion, maybe. Or relief. "Because the bond doesn't let go," he said quietly. "Because I felt you out there, somewhere, and I couldn't. I couldn't just leave you lost." "I wasn't lost," Nadia said. "I left." "I know." "Do you?" She heard the edge in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. "Do you know what it's like to walk away from everything you've ever known? Because staying means losing yourself. Do you know what it's like to choose silence over a bond you never asked for?" Rowan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "No," he said. "I don't. But I know what it's like to feel half of yourself missing and not understand why." She looked away, her throat tight. The fire blurred at the edges of her vision, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears come. "You said you tracked me across 3 territories?" she said after a moment. "Which ones?" "Greyvale, Ashford, Mill Creek." Her breath caught. Greyvale was where she had started. Where she had been promised to an alpha twice her age. A man whose idea of a bond involved obedience and silence and a bruise for every word spoken out of turn. She had run the night before the ceremony, barefoot in the snow, and hadn't looked back. "You went to Greyvale?" she asked. her voice barely above a whisper. I did? They didn't tell you anything. No, Rowan said. They told me you were a deserter, that you broke a contract and dishonored your pack, that if I found you, I should return you for judgment. Nadia's hands curled into fists on her lap. And I told them to go to hell. She looked up sharply, searching his face for the lie, the angle, the thing that would prove he was just like all the others. But all she saw was quiet fury, banked and controlled, burning steady behind his eyes. You didn't believe them? She asked. I didn't need to believe them, Rowan said. I needed to hear it from you. The bond pulled tighter, and she felt her wolf rise again, restless and awake. It had been so long since she had let herself feel this. The pull of recognition, the sense of being seen. It terrified her. Why does it matter what I say? She asked. You're an alpha. You could just take me back. You could claim me under bond law and no one would stop you. Rowan shook his head slowly. I could, he said, but I won't. Why not? Because you deserve a choice. The words hit her like a blow, and she had to look away again. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever cared whether she had a choice. I left because I didn't want to be someone's possession, she said, her voice rough. I left because the bond they tried to force on me felt like a noose. I've been human for 2 years, Rowan. I've worked in diners and libraries and nowhere, places where no one asks questions. I've lived without a pack, without a wolf, without anyone telling me who I'm supposed to be, and I was fine. Were you? He asked gently. She didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain and the fire, and the steady hum of the bond that refused to let her lie. I felt you the night you ran, Rowan said quietly. I didn't understand it then. The bond hadn't fully formed. But I felt something break, something go quiet, and I knew someone was lost. It took me weeks to figure out it was you. By then, you were already gone. Nadia pressed her lips together, her chest tight. And you've been looking ever since? Yes. Why? The question came out sharper than she meant it to, desperate, almost angry. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you spend 2 years tracking someone who doesn't want to be found? Rowan met her eyes, and the weight of his gaze was almost too much to bear. Because you're my mate, he said simply, and I don't abandon what's mine. The bond flared hot and bright between them, and Nadia felt her wolf push forward, awake and hungry and aching for the connection she had denied it for so long. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and crossed to the window. She needed distance. She needed to think past the pull, past the way his presence filled the room, and made her want things she had promised herself she would never want again. I'm not yours, she said, her back to him. I'm not anyone's, I know. Then stop saying it like it's simple. She heard him stand, heard his footsteps cross the floor, but he stopped a few feet behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not close enough to trap her. It's not simple, Rowan said quietly. I know that. I know you've been hurt. I know you have every reason not to trust this. But I'm not asking you to accept the bond tonight, Nadia. I'm just asking you to let me stay long enough to prove I'm not what you're afraid of. She turned slowly, her arms wrapped tight around herself, and looked up at him. The firelight caught the edges of his face, softening the hard lines, and she saw the exhaustion there, the quiet desperation of someone who had been searching for too long. What happens if I say no? She asked. Then I leave in the morning, he said, and I don't come back unless you ask me to. You'd do that? Yes. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this could be different, that he could be different. But trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been broken too many times. I need time, she said. I'll give you all the time you need. Nadia nodded slowly, her throat tight. The storm won't break until morning. You can stay until then. Thank you, Rowan said, and the relief in his voice was so plain it made her chest ache. She turned back to the window and watched the rain carve rivers down the glass. Behind her, she heard him return to the fire, heard the quiet creak of the chair as he sat down. The bond hummed between them, steady and sure, and for the first time in 2 years, her wolf didn't feel quite so alone. Nadia woke to pale gray light filtering through the curtains and the sound of the storm still battering the windows. She lay still for a moment, listening, and felt the bond hum steady and warm somewhere in her chest. Rowan was still here. She hadn't dreamed him. She sat up slowly, pushing the blankets aside, and padded barefoot to the bedroom door. When she opened it, she found him exactly where she had left him the night before, sitting in the chair by the fire, his head tipped back against the worn cushion, eyes closed. He hadn't taken the couch. He hadn't moved closer. He had simply stayed, keeping watch in the quiet dark while she slept. The fire had burned down to embers. She crossed the room and added another log, and the soft scrape of wood against stone made him stir. His eyes opened, gray and clear, and he straightened slightly, his gaze finding hers. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You didn't sleep?" she said. "I did, a little." She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. She moved into the small kitchen and filled the kettle, her movements automatic, her mind still turning over everything he had said the night before. The bond pulled gently between them, a reminder that no matter how much distance she put in the room, he was still here, still tethered to her in proposal, a way she couldn't undo. The kettle began to hiss, and she poured 2 cups of tea, carrying them both back to the fire. She handed one to Rowan and sat in the chair across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The storm pressed against the cottage walls, relentless, and the world beyond the windows was nothing but gray rain and wind. "You said your court was fractured," Nadia said finally, her voice quiet. "What did you mean?" Rowan wrapped both hands around his cup and stared into the steam rising from it. "I took the Northern Crown 5 years ago," he said. "The Alpha before me ruled through fear. He kept the packs in line by making examples of anyone who questioned him. When he died, the territories were barely holding together. I've spent the last 5 years trying to rebuild trust, trying to prove that strength doesn't have to come with cruelty." "And?" she asked. "And it's working. Slowly. But there are still wolves who think I'm weak because I don't rule the way he did. There are alphas in the outer packs who test me, waiting to see if I'll break." "You haven't," she said. He looked up at her, and something flickered in his eyes. "No, but it's been hard, harder than I expected." "Why are you telling me this?" Nadia asked. "Because you asked," Rowan said. "And because if you're going to decide whether or not to trust me, you should know what you'd be walking into." She studied him over the rim of her cup, taking in the exhaustion that lined his face, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. He looked like someone who had been holding something heavy for too long and didn't know how to set it down. "You said you felt it when I ran," she said. "That something broke." "Yes." "Did it make things worse? For you, I mean. For your court." Rowan hesitated, and she saw the truth in the pause before he spoke. "Yes," he said quietly. "The bond. It's supposed to strengthen an alpha. It's supposed to ground you, give you clarity. When you disappeared, when it stayed incomplete, it left a gap. My wolves could feel it. The other alphas could feel it. It made me look vulnerable." Nadia's throat tightened. "I didn't know. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," Rowan said quickly. "You had every right to run. You didn't owe me anything then, and you don't owe me anything now. I'm trying to be honest with you." She set her cup down on the small table between them and wrapped her arms around herself. The bond thrummed, steady and insistent, and she felt the weight of what he was saying settle over her like a cloak. "You're telling me that my leaving hurt you," she said, "that it hurt your pack." "I'm telling you that I understand why you left," Rowan said, "and that I don't blame you for it." "But you came looking anyway." "Yes." "Why?" The question came out raw, almost desperate. If the bond made you weak, if it made your court unstable, why didn't you just break it? Find someone else? Rowan's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Because it doesn't work that way," he said. "You don't choose a bond, Nadia. It chooses you. And once it's there, once you feel it, you can't just walk away. You can't just replace it with something easier." "Even if it costs you?" she asked. "Even then?" She looked away, her chest tight. The fire crackled softly, and the rain hammered against the windows, and she felt the careful walls she had built around herself begin to crack. "I was engaged," she said quietly, "before I ran, to an alpha in Greyvale named Matthias. He was older, established, respected. My parents arranged it when I was 17. They told me it was an honor, that I should be grateful." Rowan said nothing, but she felt the bond pull tighter, felt his attention sharpen. "He didn't want a mate," Nadia continued. "He wanted someone to stand beside him and smile, and never ask questions. He wanted obedience. And when I didn't give it to him, when I spoke up or hesitated or did anything that made him look less than perfect, he reminded me what happened to wolves who didn't know their place." She touched the scar along her collarbone, the one Rowan had noticed the night before. "This was the last reminder," she said. 2 days before the bonding ceremony. I told him I didn't want to go through with it, that I didn't love him, that I didn't think I ever could. And he hurt you," Rowan said, his voice low and dangerous. "He told me love didn't matter," Nadia said, "that the bond was a contract, and I was going to honor it whether I wanted to or not. So I ran. I waited until everyone was asleep, and I ran as far and as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I couldn't feel the pack bond anymore, until I couldn't feel anything." She looked up and met Rowan's eyes, and the fury she saw there was banked but burning. "That's why I live like this," she said. "That's why I don't want a bond. Because the last one nearly destroyed me." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "Where is he now?" he asked. "I don't know," Nadia said. "I haven't looked back." "Good," Rowan said, "because if I ever meet him, he won't walk away." The bond flared bright and hot between them, and Nadia felt her wolf rise in answer, fierce and awake. She had spent 2 years trying to bury that part of herself, trying to live without the instincts that had only ever brought her pain. But now, sitting across from this man who looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting, she felt it stir. Not with fear this time, with something dangerously close to hope. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles," she said. "I know," Rowan said. "But if you let me, I'll stand beside you for the ones that come." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "You keep saying things like that." "Because I mean them." "How do I know?" she asked. "How do I know you're not just saying what I need to hear so I'll accept the bond?" Rowan leaned back in his chair and met her gaze, steady and sure. "You don't," he said. "Not yet. That's why I'm asking for time. That's why I'm not pushing. I can tell you I'm different. I can tell you I'll never hurt you the way he did. But words are just words until you see them proven." "And if I never believe you?" Nadia asked. "If I can't get past what happened?" "Then I'll leave," Rowan said quietly. "And I'll find a way to live with it." The honesty in his voice cut deeper than any promise could have. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let the bond pull her closer, to stop running, to let herself feel safe for the first time in years. But fear was a stubborn thing, and hers had roots that went deep. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to trust someone with that much power over me." "You don't have to trust me all at once," Rowan said. "You just have to let me try." She looked at him across the firelight, at the quiet patience in his eyes, the way he held himself still and steady and undemanding. The bond hummed between them, warm and insistent, and her wolf leaned into it like something long-starved finally offered food. "The storm isn't going to break today," she said. "No," Rowan agreed. "It's not." "You can stay," Nadia said, "until it does." "Thank you," he said, and the relief in his voice made her chest ache. She stood and moved to the window, watching the rain blur the world beyond the glass. Behind her, she heard Rowan shift in his chair, heard the quiet creak of wood and the snap of the fire. The bond pulled gently, steadily, and for the first time since he had knocked on her door, she didn't try to push it away. "Tell me about your court," she said without turning around. "Not the broken parts, the parts that are working." She heard the smile in his voice before he spoke. "We have a library," Rowan said, "in the main hall. It's 3 stories tall and full of books most wolves have never heard of. The previous alpha didn't care about it, but I've been restoring it. There's a woman named Celia who runs it now. She's human. She came to us after her family cast her out, and I gave her a place." Nadia turned slightly, glancing back at him. "You let a human into your court?" "I let anyone in who needs sanctuary," Rowan said. "Wolf or human. It doesn't matter to me. That's unusual." "Maybe," he said, "but it's right." She studied him for a long moment, taking in the quiet conviction in his face, the way he spoke about his people, with something that sounded like love. This was not the man she had been afraid of. This was not Matthias, cold and controlling and cruel. This was someone different. "Tell me more," she said softly, and as the storm raged outside and the fire burned low, Rowan did. Continuation Nadia was halfway through asking about the lake that bordered Rowan's territory when headlights cut through the rain, dark afternoon, spilling across the cottage wall in twin beams that made her freeze mid-sentence. Rowan's head turned sharply toward the window, his entire body going still in a way that reminded her he was more than the patient man who had been telling her stories by the fire. He rose from his chair in one fluid movement, his posture shifting into something guarded, predatory. "Stay here," he said quietly. She didn't listen. She crossed to the window and looked out through the rain-streaked glass. A dark sedan sat idling at the end of her short driveway, engine running, headlights pointed directly at her front door. No one got out. The car just waited. "Who is that?" she whispered. Rowan moved to stand beside her, careful not to block her view. His jaw tightened as he studied the vehicle, and she saw his nostrils flare slightly as he scented the air. "Wolves," he said. "2 of them." Her stomach dropped. "From where?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the car, his expression carved from stone. "Greyvale," he said, finally. The word hit her like a fist to the chest. She took a step back from the window, her hands trembling, and the bond flared hot and urgent between them. Rowan turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "How did they find me?" she asked, her voice barely holding steady. "I don't know," Rowan said, "but they're not coming in unless you let them." The sedan doors opened. 2 men stepped out into the rain, both broad-shouldered, both moving with the easy confidence of enforcers who had never been told no. They wore dark coats and the kind of boots meant for rough terrain, And even from a distance, Nadia could see the cold purpose in the way they approached the cottage. Her wolf snarled low in her chest, awake and afraid. She hadn't felt this in 2 years, the old panic that came with knowing someone had been sent to collect her, to drag her back. "I can't go back there," she said, her voice tight. "I can't." "You're not going anywhere," Rowan said, and the quiet fury in his tone made the bond snap taut between them. "Go to the back room, lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "Rowan? Nadia?" He turned fully toward her, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders, and the contact sent a shock of warmth through her despite everything. "Trust me, please." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him she wasn't going to hide while someone else fought her battles. But the fear was louder than her pride, and when he looked at her like that, steady and sure and unafraid, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she whispered. He guided her toward the hallway, his hand at the small of her back, and she slipped into the small bedroom at the rear of the cottage. She closed the door but didn't lock it. Instead, she pressed her ear to the wood and listened as Rowan's footsteps returned to the main room. The knock came hard and sharp, rattling the front door in its frame. She heard Rowan cross the floor, heard the lock turn, heard the door swing open, and the rain suddenly grow louder as the storm poured in. "Can I help you?" Rowan's voice was calm, measured, but she could hear the steel beneath it. "We're looking for someone." The voice that answered was smooth, confident, edged with authority. "A female wolf. Goes by Nadia. We have reason to believe she's sheltering here." "And who's asking?" "Enforcers from the Greyvale pack," the man said. "Under orders from Alpha Matthias. The female is bound by contract and has been in breach for 2 years. We're here to return her for judgment." Nadia's breath caught in her throat. Her hands pressed flat against the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "She's not here," Rowan said, his tone giving nothing away. "We can send her," the second enforcer said, his voice rougher, less patient. "Fresh trail. She's been here recently, if not right now. Step aside and let us verify." "No." The single word hung in the air, flat and absolute. Nadia felt the bond flare brighter, felt Rowan's presence fill the space between the cottage and the men who stood in the rain. "Excuse me?" the first enforcer said, his voice sharpening. "I said no," Rowan repeated. "This is private property. You don't have jurisdiction here, and you sure as hell don't have permission to enter." There was a pause, and Nadia could almost feel the enforcers recalibrating, reassessing the man who stood between them and their prize. "We're not looking for trouble," the first enforcer said, his tone careful now. "But Alpha Matthias has a legal claim. The bond contract was signed by her family. She's obligated to return." "Contracts signed under duress aren't worth the paper they're written on," Rowan said coldly. "And I don't give a damn what Matthias thinks he's owed." "Who the hell are you?" the second enforcer demanded. Rowan's silence stretched long enough that Nadia could hear the rain hammering the porch roof, could hear the enforcer shift his weight uneasily. "My name is Rowan," he said finally, his voice quiet and deadly. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and the female you're looking for is under my protection." The air itself seemed to change. Nadia felt the bond snap taut, felt the weight of Rowan's authority roll through the room like thunder. She heard one of the enforcers take a sharp breath, heard the second one curse under his breath. "Your Majesty," the first enforcer said, his voice suddenly uncertain. We weren't told." "You weren't told because it's none of Matthias's business," Rowan said. "The female you're tracking is my mate. The bond formed 2 years ago. Any claim he thinks he has is void." Nadia's knees nearly buckled. She pressed her forehead against the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He had just claimed her. publicly, in front of witnesses who would carry the news back to Matthias within hours. That's not possible, the second enforcer said. Alpha Matthias would have been notified if a royal bond had formed. Protocol. Protocol doesn't apply when the female in question was fleeing abuse, Rowan said, and his voice dropped into something that made Nadia's wolf go still and quiet. She ran because your alpha is a sadistic bastard who doesn't know the difference between a bond and a cage. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in that car, you're going to drive back to Greyvale. And you're going to tell Matthias that if he ever sends anyone after her again, I'll consider it an act of war. You can't just... I can, Rowan said, and I am. Now leave. There was a long, tense silence. Nadia held her breath, waiting for the sound of a challenge, a fight, something that would prove this was about to go wrong. But all she heard was the rain and the quiet scrape of boots on wet wood as the enforcers stepped back from the door. This isn't over, the first enforcer said, his voice tight. Alpha Matthias isn't going to just accept this. Then he can take it up with me directly, Rowan said. But if he's smart, he'll let her go. The enforcers didn't answer. Nadia heard their footsteps retreat down the porch steps, heard the car doors slam, heard the engine rev as they backed out of the driveway and disappeared into the storm. The front door closed. Nadia sagged against the wall, her legs shaking, her heart still racing. She heard Rowan lock the door, heard his footsteps cross the floor, and then the bedroom door opened, and he was there, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, even though she wasn't sure it was true. "You claimed me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did." "Why?" Rowan stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, giving them privacy, even though there was no one left to hear. "Because it was the only way to make them leave," he said. "Because Matthias doesn't respect anything except power and rank, and if I hadn't pulled the bond card, they would have tried to take you by force." "But now everyone will know," Nadia said. "Your court. The other packs. They'll all know about me." "Yes. And you're okay with that?" He crossed the small room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that the bond hummed bright and steady between them. "Nadia," he said quietly, "I've been looking for you for 2 years. I've spent every day since the bond formed trying to find you, trying to make sure you were safe. Do you really think I care what anyone else thinks?" She looked up at him, at the fierce certainty in his eyes, and felt something inside her chest crack open. "They're going to come back," she said. "Matthias won't let this go." "Then let him come," Rowan said. "But he'll have to go through me to get to you." The bond flared hot and bright, and Nadia felt her wolf push forward, fierce and protective, and suddenly, fiercely awake. She had spent 2 years running, 2 years hiding, 2 years trying to convince herself she didn't need anyone, didn't need the bond, didn't need the part of herself that howled for pack and home and connection. But standing here, looking into Rowan's eyes, feeling the steady certainty of his presence, she realized she was tired of running. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you," Rowan said. "If you want, I can take you north tonight. My territory is 3 hours from here, and once you're inside the borders, Matthias can't touch you. You'll be safe. You'll have time to decide what you want. And if I don't go with you, then I stay here until you do," he said simply. "Or until you tell me to leave." Nadia shook her head slowly, a bitter smile pulling at her lips. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not when it matters." She looked away, her arms wrapping around herself. The storm still raged outside, the rain still hammered the windows, and somewhere out there Matthias was receiving word that his runaway bride had resurfaced, under the protection of an alpha king. The thought made her stomach twist. "I don't know if I can do this," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can accept the bond. Not after everything." "I'm not asking you to accept it tonight," Rowan said. "I'm just asking you to let me keep you safe." She turned back to him, searching his face for the trap, the angle, the thing that would prove this was just another cage with better bars. But all she saw was patience, and something that looked like devotion, and the quiet strength of someone who had already decided she was worth protecting. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll go with you." The relief that crossed Rowan's face was so plain it made her throat tighten. "Thank you," he said. "But I'm not promising anything," Nadia added quickly. "I'm not saying I'll accept the bond. I'm saying I'll try." "That's all I'm asking," Rowan said. She nodded slowly, her heart still racing, her wolf still restless beneath her skin. The fear hadn't gone away. The scars Matthias had left were still there, still raw, still aching. But for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't facing them alone. "We should leave soon," Rowan said, "before they decide to come back with reinforcements." "How soon?" "An hour, maybe less." Nadia looked around the small bedroom, at the life she had built here, quiet and careful and alone. It wasn't much, but it had been hers. "I don't have much to pack," she said. "Then we'll be ready." He stepped back, giving her space, and moved toward the door. But before he left, he paused and looked back at her, his expression soft in a way that made the bond pull tight between them. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad I found you." Nadia's throat tightened, and she nodded once, unable to find the words to answer. Rowan left the room, and she stood alone in the quiet dark, listening to the storm and feeling the bond hum steady and sure beneath her ribs. Nadia stood in the doorway of the bedroom, a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder, and watched Rowan move through the cottage with quiet efficiency. He had checked the windows twice, tested the back door, and now stood by the front window watching the rain-soaked driveway with an intensity that made her wolf settle into cautious readiness. "They won't come back tonight," she said, more to convince herself than him. Rowan glanced back at her, his expression unreadable in the dim firelight. "Maybe not," he said, "but I'm not willing to bet your safety on maybe." She stepped into the main room and set her bag down by the door. Everything she owned in this careful human life fit into one small bag. The realization should have felt freeing, but instead it just felt hollow. "I need to ask you something," she said. He turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "All right. When you claimed me out there," she said slowly, "when you told them the bond had formed, was any of that true, or was it just strategy?" The question hung between them, sharp and necessary. The bond hummed in her chest, waiting. Rowan crossed the room and stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the firelight reflected in his eyes. "The bond formed the night you ran," he said quietly. "I felt it snap into place while you were already gone. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was just grief, loss. But it never faded. It just grew stronger." Nadia's breath caught. 2 years, she whispered. "You felt it for 2 years and you never told you?" Rowan finished. "How could I? You were gone. You were hiding. And even if I'd found you sooner, what right did I have to tell you the bond had chosen for you when you'd just escaped someone who tried to do exactly that?" She wrapped her arms around herself, her throat tight. "So you just waited." "I looked," he corrected gently. "And I waited. And I hoped that when I found you, you'd give me the chance to prove the bond didn't have to be a cage." The honesty in his voice cut through every defense she had left. She wanted to step back, to retreat into the safety of distance and skepticism. But her wolf pushed forward, awake and hungry and aching for the connection she had denied it for so long. "What if I can't do this?" she asked. "What if I try and I just can't?" "Then we'll figure it out," Rowan said. "Together." The word settled over her like a promise, warm and steady and terrifying in its simplicity. She was about to answer when headlights swept across the window again, brighter this time, and her entire body went rigid. Rowan's expression hardened. He moved to the window in 2 strides and looked out, his posture shifting into something coiled and dangerous. "How many?" Nadia asked, her voice tight. 3 vehicles, he said. 6 wolves? Maybe more." Her stomach dropped. "They brought reinforcements." "So it seems." The cars stopped at the end of the driveway, engines idling, headlights cutting through the rain in harsh white beams. Nadia moved to stand beside Rowan, her heart hammering, and watched as the doors opened and enforcer stepped out into the storm. She recognized the 2 from before, but the others were new. Bigger, older, and standing at the center of them, dressed in a long black coat that made him look like something carved from shadow, was Matthias. The sight of him made her wolf snarl and her hands curl into fists. She hadn't seen him in 2 years, but he looked exactly the same. Tall and broad-shouldered, with pale eyes that never seemed to blink, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, and even from a distance she could feel the cold authority radiating from him. "He came himself," she whispered. Rowan's jaw tightened. "Stay behind me." "Rowan." "Nadia." He turned to her, his eyes fierce. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, even though every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to do anything except stand here and wait for Matthias to come for her. Rowan moved to the front door and opened it before Matthias could knock. He stepped out onto the porch, and Nadia followed despite his earlier command, unable to stay inside while he faced this alone. The rain soaked through her sweater in seconds, but she barely felt it. All her attention was locked on Matthias as he approached the porch steps, his enforcers fanning out behind him in a loose semicircle. "Alpha King Rowan?" Matthias said, his voice smooth and cold. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Matthias?" Rowan said flatly. "You're trespassing." "Am I?" Matthias's pale eyes flicked past Rowan to where Nadia stood, and something ugly flickered across his face. "I was under the impression I was simply collecting what belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to you," Rowan said, his voice dropping into something that made the bond flare hot and bright in Nadia's chest. "She never did." Matthias smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The contract her family signed says otherwise. A bond agreement, witnessed and sealed under pack law. She was promised to me, and she will honor that promise." "The contract is void," Rowan said. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that it was signed under duress, and that the female in question has already bonded to another alpha." Matthias's expression didn't change, but Nadia saw his hands flex at his sides. "You?" he said quietly. "Me," Rowan confirmed. "Convenient," Matthias said. "A royal bond, formed just in time to circumvent a legal claim. Tell me, Your Majesty, when exactly did this miraculous bond occur?" 2 years ago, Rowan said. "The night she ran from you." Matthias's smile sharpened. "And yet you never reported it, never filed the paperwork, never made it official through the proper channels." "Strange, don't you think?" "I don't answer to you," Rowan said. "No," Matthias agreed, "but you do answer to pack law. And pack law states that a bond must be registered within 6 months of formation, or it can be challenged by a prior claim. You're 2 years late, Your Majesty, which means your bond, if it even exists, has no legal standing. Nadia felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't known that. She hadn't known the bond could be invalidated by paperwork and timelines and bureaucratic nonsense. But Rowan didn't flinch. "The bond exists," he said, "and it doesn't need a piece of paper to make it real." "Maybe not," Matthias said, "but it does need one to make it legal. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to step aside. My enforcers are going to escort Nadia back to Greyvale. And once she's fulfilled her contract, you're welcome to file whatever claim you think you have. If it's legitimate, I'm sure the council will honor it." "No," Rowan said. Matthias's expression hardened. "That wasn't a request." "And this isn't a negotiation," Rowan said. "She's not going with you. Not tonight. Not ever." "Then I'll take her by force," Matthias said, and his enforcers shifted forward, closing the circle. Nadia's wolf snarled, and before she could think better of it, she stepped forward to stand beside Rowan. "Stop." Matthias's gaze locked on her, and the weight of it made her skin crawl. "Nadia," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "you've caused a great deal of trouble, but it's not too late to make this right. Come home. Honor your contract, and I'll consider forgiving your indiscretion." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Nadia said, her voice shaking but steady. "I told you 2 years ago I didn't want the bond. I'm telling you again now. I don't want you. I never did." "What you want is irrelevant," Matthias said. "You were promised. Your family accepted the bride price. The contract is binding." "Then break it," Nadia said. "I don't think I will." The bond flared in her chest, bright and fierce, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't about the contract. This wasn't about honor or pack law or anything that mattered. This was about control. About Matthias proving he could take what he wanted, when he wanted it, and no one could stop him. She took a breath and felt Rowan's presence beside her, steady and sure, and made a choice. "I accept Rowan's bond," she said clearly. "Here, now, in front of witnesses. I claim him as my mate, and I accept the bond that formed between us." The words rang out across the rain-soaked yard, and the bond snapped tight and blazing between them. Rowan turned to her sharply, his eyes wide, and she saw the shock and hope and fierce protectiveness flare across his face. Matthias went very still. "You can't do that." "I just did," Nadia said. "The bond is complete. Your contract is void. I'm not yours, Matthias. I never was." For a long moment, no one moved. The rain poured down around them, and the enforcers shifted uneasily, and Matthias stared at her with an expression that made her wolf bare its teeth. Then he smiled, cold and sharp. "We'll see what the council has to say about that." "You do that," Rowan said quietly. "But in the meantime, you're going to leave now." Matthias held his gaze for another heartbeat, then turned on his heel and strode back to his car. His enforcers followed, their expressions dark, and within moments the vehicles were pulling away, disappearing into the storm. Nadia stood frozen on the porch, her heart hammering, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something that felt dangerously close to relief. Rowan turned to her, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. "Did you mean it?" he asked, his voice rough. "Or was that just strategy?" She looked up at him, at the hope and uncertainty written across his face, and felt the bond hum warm and steady in her chest. "I meant it," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I can do this without being afraid. But I want to try. I want to choose this. Choose you." Rowan's expression broke open into something raw and unguarded, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the rain poured down around them. She pressed her face against his chest, and felt the steady beat of his heart, felt the bond settle into place like something that had always been meant to fit there. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice muffled against her hair. "Thank you for choosing me." She didn't answer. She just held on and let herself believe, for the first time in 2 years, that maybe she didn't have to run anymore. The rain had softened to a whisper by the time they stepped back inside the cottage, their clothes soaked through, water pooling on the worn floorboards beneath them. Nadia stood just inside the doorway, shivering, her arms wrapped tight around herself as the reality of what she had just done began to sink in. She had claimed him, in front of Matthias, in front of witnesses who would carry that declaration back to Greyvale and beyond. The bond wasn't just real anymore. It was public, binding, irrevocable. Rowan closed the door and locked it, then turned to face her. His hair was plastered to his forehead, rain dripping from the ends, and his shirt clung to his shoulders in a way that made her acutely aware of the sheer presence of him. He didn't move closer. He just stood there, watching her with an expression that held so much hope and fear and desperate gratitude that it made her chest ache. "Nadia," he said quietly, "did you mean it?" She looked up at him, her throat tight. "You already asked me that." "I know," he said, "but we were outside, in the moment, and I need to know, now that we're here, now that the adrenaline is fading, do you still mean it?" She could have lied. She could have told him it was strategy, that she had only said the words to make Matthias leave, that none of it was real. But the bond hummed warm and steady in her chest, and her wolf was awake and present in a way it hadn't been since the night she ran, and she was so tired of running. "Yes," she whispered. "I meant it." Rowan let out a breath, long and shaky, and the tension in his shoulders eased just slightly. "Then I need to ask you something else." "All right." "Was it just to escape Matthias?" he asked, his voice careful. "Or was it because you want this? Because you want me?" The question cut straight through every wall she had left. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he braced himself for whatever answer she might give. This man who had tracked her across 3 territories, who had spent 2 years searching for her, who had stood between her and Matthias without hesitation. He was asking her if she wanted him. "I don't know," she admitted, and saw the flicker of pain cross his face. "I don't know if I can separate the fear from the truth yet. I don't know if I'm choosing you or just choosing safety. But I know I felt something when the bond snapped into place. I know I felt it settle, like something clicking into alignment. And I know that when I look at you, I don't want to run." Rowan crossed the room slowly, giving her time to step back if she needed to. But she didn't move. She just stood there, watching him, feeling the bond pull tighter with every step he took. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, despite the rain-soaked chill of his clothes. "That's enough," he said quietly. "For now, that's enough." She looked up at him, at the fierce certainty in his eyes, and felt the last of her defenses crack. "What happens now?" "Now we leave," Rowan said, "before Matthias decides to come back with more leverage. I meant what I said earlier. My territory is 3 hours north. Once you're inside my borders, he can't touch you. The bond will be registered. You'll be protected." "And after that?" "After that," Rowan said, "we take it one day at a time. You don't have to accept everything all at once. You don't have to trust me completely. You just have to let me prove to you that I'm worth trusting." Nadia swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "I'm scared." "I know," he said. "But you're not alone anymore." The bond flared bright and warm between them, and before she could think better of it, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, steady and sure, and the contact sent a shock of warmth through her that had nothing to do with body heat and everything to do with the bond singing between them. "We should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rowan nodded, but he didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he lifted it gently and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said, "for choosing me, for giving me the chance." She didn't trust herself to answer. She just squeezed his hand and let him lead her toward the door. They gathered the few belongings she had left, moving quickly and quietly through the small cottage. Rowan checked the windows one last time, his posture alert, and Nadia found herself watching him with something that felt dangerously close to trust. He moved like someone who knew how to protect, how to shield, but there was nothing possessive in it. Nothing that reminded her of Matthias's cold control. "Ready?" he asked, turning back to her. She looked around the cottage one last time at the small space she had carved out for herself in the human world. It had been safe, quiet, lonely, but it had been hers. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They stepped out into the fading storm together, and Rowan led her to a dark SUV parked just beyond the cottage. He opened the passenger door for her, waited until she was settled, then moved around to the driver's side with the kind of efficiency that spoke of long practice. The engine started with a low rumble, and they pulled away from the cottage, leaving the only safe haven Nadia had known for 2 years behind in the rain-soaked dark. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. Rowan drove with quiet focus, his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. Nadia sat beside him, watching the dark landscape blur past the windows, feeling the bond hum steadily between them. The rain had stopped completely by the time they crossed into neutral territory, leaving the roads slick and gleaming under the headlights. Nadia felt the shift the moment it happened, a subtle easing of tension in her chest as the pull of Greyvale's borders faded behind them. "You felt that," Rowan said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she admitted. "Is it always like that? Crossing pack lines?" "For wolves who are running, yes," he said. "For wolves who belong, it feels different. Like coming home." She looked over at him, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way the dashboard lights cast his face in soft shadow. "What does it feel like for you?" He glanced at her, just for a moment, and the warmth in his eyes made her chest tighten. "Right now, it feels like I'm finally bringing you home." The words settled over her, heavy and complicated. Home. She hadn't had one of those in 2 years. She wasn't sure she even knew what it meant anymore. "Tell me about your court," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own fear. "The parts you haven't told me yet." Rowan's expression softened. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," she said. "I want to know what I'm walking into." He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "The Northern Court isn't like Greyvale," he said finally. "It's not built on fear or control. I've spent the last 5 years trying to make it a place where wolves can live without constantly looking over their shoulders." "And has it worked?" "Mostly," he said. "There are still packs that test me. Still alphas who think strength means cruelty. But we're getting there." "What about your wolves?" Nadia asked. "The ones who live at court. What are they like?" "Loyal," Rowan said. "Most of them, anyway. There's my second, Garrett. He's been with me since the beginning. Sharp, steady, doesn't pull punches when I need to hear the truth. There's Celia, the librarian I told you about. And a few others who've found their way to us over the years. Wolves who needed a place to belong." "Like me," Nadia said quietly. Rowan glanced at her again, and the look in his eyes made the bond pull tight. "Like you." She turned back to the window, watching the dark trees blur past. "What will they think of me? A runaway Luna who's been hiding in the human world for 2 years?" "They'll think you're brave," Rowan said. "And strong. And exactly where you're meant to be." "You don't know that." "I do," he said simply. "Because I know my wolves. and I know they'll see what I see when I look at you." "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Someone worth fighting for." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she had to look away, blinking hard against the sudden sting of tears. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever made her feel like she was worth more than the contract she'd been born into. "Rowan," she whispered. "It's the truth," he said, "and I'm going to spend as long as it takes proving it to you." They drove in silence for another hour, the road winding north through dark forests and empty fields. Nadia felt the bond settle deeper with every mile, felt her wolf lean into the connection in a way that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. When the first lights of Rowan's territory appeared on the horizon, soft and golden against the dark sky, she felt something in her chest ease. "We're close," Rowan said. "Another 20 minutes and we'll be at the main hall." Nadia nodded, her throat tight. "What happens when we get there?" "I'll register the bond with my counsel," he said. "It'll be official, legal. Matthias won't be able to challenge it." "And then?" "And then," Rowan said, glancing at her with a softness that made her heart stutter, "you rest, you settle, and we figure out what comes next. Together." She wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what together meant, what he expected, what he needed from her. But before she could find the words, they crested a hill, and the northern court spread out before them. It wasn't what she had expected. There were no high walls, no fortified gates, just a sprawling collection of stone buildings nestled into the hillside. Warm lights glowing from windows, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked peaceful, safe, like a place someone could actually call home. Rowan pulled up to the main hall and parked, then turned to face her fully. "Are you ready?" Nadia looked at the building in front of them, at the warm light spilling from the windows, and felt the bond hum steady and sure in her chest. She was terrified. She was exhausted. She was still half convinced this was all going to fall apart the moment she stepped inside. But Rowan was looking at her like she mattered, and the bond was singing between them. And for the first time in 2 years, she wasn't alone. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." He smiled, soft and genuine, and reached across the console to take her hand. "Then let's go home." They stepped out of the vehicle together, and Rowan led her up the steps to the main hall. The door opened before they reached it, and a tall man with dark hair and sharp eyes stepped out, his gaze moving between Rowan and Nadia with open curiosity. "Your Majesty," the man said, his voice warm, "we weren't expecting you back tonight." "Change of plans, Garrett," Rowan said. "Is the council still awake?" "Most of them," Garrett said. Then his gaze settled on Nadia, and something knowing flickered across his face. "You found her." "I did," Rowan said quietly. Garrett's expression softened, and he stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Then welcome home, both of you." Nadia stepped through the doorway, Rowan's hand steady at the small of her back, and felt the bond settle into place like something that had finally found where it belonged. The fear was still there, the scars were still raw, but as she looked around at the warm hall, at the wolves who turned to greet them with curious but kind expressions, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Rowan guided her deeper into the hall, and she let herself lean into his presence, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally stopped running.